In the year 1004, a Byzantine princess arrived in Venice for her wedding. She was young, cultured, and, by every account, extraordinarily refined. 2 years later, she was dead, and a Catholic theologian stood in front of his congregation and declared that her death was God's own punishment. He wrote that her body had wasted away and rotted from within as divine justice for her sin. Her crime wasn't treason. It wasn't heresy, not in any way the church usually meant it. Her crime was this: she refused to eat with her fingers. Her name was Maria Argyropolina, niece of a Byzantine emperor. And what she brought with her from Constantinople was something almost nobody in Western Europe had ever seen at a personal dinner setting: a small, golden instrument with 2 prongs. We call it a fork. In the year 1004, half of Europe would have called it an insult to God. Here's the part that makes this stranger. The fork itself wasn't some brand new invention. Archaeologists have found forks in Egyptian and Roman kitchens going back thousands of years before Maria was even born. Bronze ones, even silver ones. But those were cooking tools. You used one to pull meat out of a boiling pot or hold something steady while you carved it. Nobody used one to actually eat. Eating, for almost the entirety of human history up to that point, was done with your hands, a knife you brought yourself, and, if you were lucky, a spoon for anything liquid. So when Maria sat down at her own wedding feast and used a personal golden fork to lift food to her own mouth, the object wasn't the scandal. Forks had existed for centuries. What she was using it for was the scandal. To understand why that mattered so much, you have to understand what eating with your hands actually meant to a medieval Christian. It wasn't just custom. It was doctrine. Your fingers, the reasoning went, were given to you by God specifically for this purpose: to reach for a metal tool instead, to imply that your own God-given body wasn't good enough for God-given food. Read, to a lot of clergy, as an act of vanity dangerously close to blasphemy. Venetian clergy at the time reportedly said as much directly, that God, in his wisdom, had already given every person all the forks they would ever need: their own 2 hands. When Maria died of the plague a couple of years later, the theologian Peter Damian held her up as a warning to the rest of Christendom. Her early death, he argued, was God settling the score. It's worth pausing here to say, historians today aren't fully certain every detail of this exact story lines up. The tale gets retold across different centuries, with different Byzantine princesses swapped into the leading role, and some of the dates are debated, but the core of it is solidly documented. A personal eating fork showed up at a European wedding. It scandalized an entire city, and the woman who brought it became a cautionary tale that clergy repeated for generations after her death. And that wasn't a one-time overreaction. That was the opening chapter of roughly 600 years of Europe treating a 2-pronged eating utensil like foreign, sinful nonsense. For the next 300 years, personal eating forks barely left Byzantine and Middle Eastern tables. Most of Western Europe kept eating exactly the way it always had. The fork was never formally banned anywhere. It didn't need to be. It was simply, persistently, deeply uncool. A symbol of Eastern excess that no self-respecting Western noble wanted anywhere near their own plate. Italy was the first place that resistance cracked. And it cracked for the most unglamorous reason imaginable. By the 1300s, forks had quietly become common on wealthy Italian tables, not because anyone had a theological change of heart, but because of pasta. Try eating long, slippery strands of noodles using only your fingers and a knife. It's a mess. A 2-pronged fork solves the problem instantly. Practicality did, in a few decades, what 3 centuries of religious pressure couldn't undo. France came next, and even there the fork's reputation stayed shaky for a long time. When Catherine de' Medici, an Italian noblewoman, married into the French royal court in the 16th century, she brought her own Italian forks with her. French nobility adopted them, but slowly, and mostly as a display of imported wealth rather than genuine daily habit. It would still be generations before an ordinary French household used a fork without thinking twice about it. But if you wanted to see real, stubborn resistance, you had to cross the English Channel. In 1608, an English traveler named Thomas Coriat toured Italy and came home genuinely enchanted by what he'd seen there, forks included. He wrote it all down in a travel journal, describing exactly how Italians used their forks at the table and gently suggested his fellow Englishmen might want to give it a try. His countrymen's response was to turn his own name into a joke. They nicknamed him Furcifer, a Latin pun that literally means fork bearer, but was also slang for rascal, the kind of word you'd spit at someone you found ridiculous. In early 1600s England, carrying a fork wasn't refined. It was effeminate, foreign, faintly absurd. Proper Englishmen, the thinking went, ate with their own two hands and didn't need a piece of Italian cutlery to do it for them. It took nearly another 100 years and a broader shift in English table manners before the fork finally stopped being a punchline in its own country. Add it all up, and it took roughly 700 years for the fork to travel from instrument of the devil to thing nobody thinks twice about. 7 centuries of scandal, ridicule, and open religious condemnation. For an object that's currently sitting, completely unremarkable, in a drawer in your own kitchen. And that's really the idea behind this whole channel. Every object around you right now was, at some point, somebody's controversy, somebody's scandal, somebody's proof that the world was going to ruin. The fork just happens to be the one that got there first. The original example of a pattern humans have repeated with almost everything new ever since. Assume the new thing is dangerous, right up until the moment it's just Tuesday. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. A new one goes up every week. Next up, an object designed in 3 hours to settle a $15 debt by a man who then sold the idea for almost nothing and watched someone else get rich off it instead. Tell me in the comments, what's the most ordinary object on your table right now that you'd bet has a history like this hiding behind it?